The courtroom was a powder keg, and Judge Evelyn Harper lit the fuse. Her gavel slammed down, silencing the murmurs, but her words sharp, venomous, cut deeper than any ruling. "You people always think you can game the system," she sneered, her eyes locked on Marcus Tate, a 24-year-old black man in an orange jumpsuit, standing accused of a crime he swore he didn't commit. Marcus's hands clenched behind his back, the cuffs biting into his wrists. The words, "you people," echoed in his mind, a phrase he'd heard too many times on the streets of his Chicago neighborhood, in the whispers of teachers who doubted him, in the glares of cops who profiled him. But here, in a courtroom, from a judge draped in black robes, it felt like a blade to the heart. The air grew thick, the spectators frozen, as if the room itself held its breath. Harper leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light, her voice dripping with disdain. "I've seen your kind before, Mr. Tate. Thugs who think they're above the law." The gallery gasped. Marcus's lawyer, Sarah Klein, a young public defender with fire in her eyes, shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. That's prejudicial and irrelevant." Her voice trembled, not from fear but from fury. Harper waved her off like swatting a fly. "Sit down, Miss Klein, or you'll be in contempt." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she sank back into her chair, her pen tapping furiously against her notepad. Marcus, though, didn't flinch. His brown eyes, steady and unyielding, met Harper's. He wasn't just a defendant now, he was a man carrying the weight of every stereotype, every injustice, every time he'd been told he was less. The trial was for a Roberia convenience store stick-up caught on grainy footage. The prosecution claimed Marcus was the masked figure, identified by a witness who saw him fleeing. But the evidence was shaky, no fingerprints, no weapon, just a vague description that could fit half the men in his neighborhood. Marcus had an alibi. His grandmother, Ruth, swore he was home helping her cook dinner that night, but Harper dismissed her testimony with a scoff. "Family lies for family," she'd said, her tone implying more than her words. Marcus wasn't perfect. He'd grown up in Englewood, where survival meant tough choices. He'd run with a rough crowd as a teen, made mistakes, but he'd pulled himself out, got a job at a community center, mentored kids, dreamed of college. Yet here he was, on trial for a crime he didn't commit, judged not just by the law but by the woman behind the bench who saw his skin before his story. The tension built over days. Harper's rulings grew harsher, her comments more pointed. She mocked Marcus's appearance, his thuggish posture, even his grammar when he spoke. Sarah fought back, filing motions, citing bias, but Harper's power was absolute. The jury, a mix of faces that looked nothing like Marcus's, watched in uneasy silence. Some shifted uncomfortably, others nodded along with Harper's barbs. On the fifth day, the courtroom exploded. Harper, frustrated by Sarah's relentless push for a mistrial, snapped. "This is my courtroom, Miss Klein, and I won't let you or your client turn it into a circus." She turned to Marcus, her voice rising. "You're nothing but a criminal, and you'll never be anything more. I'm recommending the maximum sentence." The gallery erupted. Spectators shouted, some in outrage, others in agreement. Sarah slammed her fist on the table. "Your Honor, this is misconduct. You're poisoning the jury." Marcus's mother, sitting in the back, sobbed, her hands clasped in prayer. But Marcus stood still, his gaze never leaving Harper. Something shifted in him, not defeat, but resolve. Then came the twist no one saw coming. As Harper called for order, a man in a sheriff's uniform stepped forward from the back of the room. He was tall, black, with a calm authority that commanded attention. Deputy James Carter, a 15-year veteran of the county sheriff's office, had been watching the trial closely. Unknown to most, Carter had a history with Marcus, been one of the kids Marcus mentored at the community center. Carter knew Marcus wasn't the man Harper painted him to be. "Your Honor," Carter said, his voice steady but firm, "I need you to step down from the bench." The room fell silent. Harper's face flushed red. "Excuse me. "You don't give orders here, deputy." Carter didn't waver. He pulled a document from his pocket, a warrant, signed by a higher judge, based on evidence Carter had quietly gathered over days. Harper's conduct, her documented history of biased rulings, had crossed a line. The state's Judicial Oversight Board had been alerted, and Carter, as an officer of the court, was authorized to act. "You're under arrest, Judge Harper, for judicial misconduct and abuse of power," Carter said, his words cutting through the stunned silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Harper's gavel slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. "This is absurd," she shouted, but Carter was already moving toward the bench, cuffs in hand. Marcus watched, his heart pounding. The man he'd once mentored was now the one holding the scales of justice. It wasn't just about him, Anna Marie, it was about every person Harper had demeaned, every life she'd dismissed with her gavel and her prejudice. Sarah, wide-eyed, grabbed Marcus's arm. "Did you know about this?" she whispered. He shook his head, too stunned to speak. As Carter escorted Harper from the courtroom, her protests echoing, the jury was dismissed, and a mistrial was declared. Marcus was released on bond, pending a new trial with a different judge. But the story didn't end there. The arrest made headlines, sparking protests and debates about systemic bias in the justice system. Harper's career unraveled, her past rulings scrutinized, revealing a pattern of discrimination that couldn't be ignored. Marcus became a reluctant symbol, a young man who'd faced the worst of the system and emerged not broken, but stronger. He didn't want fame, he wanted change. With Sarah's help, he filed a civil suit against Harper, not for money, but to push for reforms. Community leaders rallied around him, and his story inspired others to speak out. Months later, in a new courtroom with a fair judge, Marcus was acquitted. The evidence, re-examined, fell apart under scrutiny. He walked out a free man, his grandmother's arms around him, tears streaming down her face. But the victory was bittersweet. The scars of Harper's words, of the system's weight, lingered. In the end, Marcus didn't just win his case, he reclaimed his dignity. He went back to the community center, mentoring kids with renewed purpose, teaching them they could rise above the labels others placed on them. Carter, too, became a quiet hero, his courage in that courtroom a reminder that justice, though flawed, could still be fought for. The wooden plaque from the courtroom, with its handwritten note, "Justice tested in court," was kept by Sarah as a reminder. It wasn't just a prop, it was a testament to a moment when one man's resilience and another's bravery turned a broken system's own tools against it. Marcus's story wasn't just about surviving prejudice, it was about proving that even in the darkest moments, humanity could prevail. The courtroom doors swung shut behind Judge Evelyn Harper, her protests fading into the hallway as Deputy James Carter led her away. The silence that followed was deafening, a collective exhale from a room that had been suffocating under the weight of her words. Marcus Tate stood at the defendant's table, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the polished wood and somber faces around him. His lawyer, Sarah Klein, gripped his arm, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Marcus, you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, but his mind was racing, replaying the moment Carter, his old mentee, had turned the tables on Harper. It was justice, but it felt surreal, like a dream he didn't trust wouldn't unravel. The mistrial was official by noon. The judge's arrest had thrown the case into chaos, and the new judge assigned, a soft-spoken woman named Judge Linda Brooks, ordered Marcus released on bond pending a retrial. As he stepped out of the courthouse, the Chicago sun hit his face, warm but unfamiliar after days in a cell. His grandmother, Ruth, was waiting, her frail frame trembling as she pulled him into a hug. "I knew you didn't do it," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Marcus held her tightly, the weight of her faith in him grounding him in a world that felt unsteady. The news spread like wildfire. By evening, local stations were replaying grainy footage of Harper's arrest, her face a mask of indignation as Carter cuffed her. Social media erupted, hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Harper Arrested" trended, with thousands sharing clips of Harper's venomous remarks. Some called her a disgrace, others, a vocal minority, defended her, claiming she was just tough on crime. The divide was stark, splitting along familiar lines: race, class, and trust in the system. Marcus's phone buzzed endlessly with notifications, but he silenced it. He didn't want to be a symbol, he just wanted to go home. Home, though, wasn't the same. Englewood streets, lined with cracked sidewalks and corner stores, felt both comforting and claustrophobic. Neighbors stopped by Ruth's small apartment, offering food and words of support, but Marcus saw the pity in their eyes. He wasn't just Marcus anymore, was the guy from the viral courtroom video, the black man who'd taken down a racist judge. The weight of it pressed on him, heavy as the cuffs he'd worn. Sarah, relentless as ever, didn't let him retreat. She showed up the next morning with a plan. "This isn't just about you, Marcus," she said, spreading papers across Ruth's kitchen table. "Harper's been doing this for years, targeting defendants, especially black and brown ones. We can sue, not for money, but to force change. Oversight, training, something." Her idealism was infectious, but Marcus hesitated. He'd spent his life avoiding the spotlight, knowing it rarely ended well for people like him. Still, he thought of the kids at the community center, the ones who looked up to him. If he stayed silent, what would they learn? They filed the lawsuit, alleging judicial misconduct and systemic bias. The case drew attention from civil rights groups, who saw it as a chance to expose cracks in the justice system. Harper's history came under scrutiny. Decades of rulings showed a pattern: harsher sentences for black defendants, dismissive remarks about their backgrounds, and a tendency to favor prosecution witnesses. The evidence was damning, and public pressure mounted. Protests sprang up outside the courthouse, with signs reading, "No justice, no peace," and "End bias in the bench." Marcus avoided the rallies, but Ruth went, holding a sign with his name in bold letters. Meanwhile, Harper's fall was swift. Stripped of her robes, she faced her own legal battles. The Judicial Oversight Board suspended her, and criminal charges, abuse of power and obstruction of justice, loomed. Her defenders argued she was a victim of cancel culture, but the tapes of her courtroom rants told a different story. Her career, once untouchable, was in ruins. Marcus's retrial was set for 3 months later, under Judge Brooks. Sarah worked tirelessly, digging into the robbery case. The original witness, a store clerk, admitted under pressure that he wasn't certain Marcus was the suspect. He'd been coached by police to point him out. The security footage, reanalyzed, showed discrepancies in height and build. Marcus's alibi, Ruth's testimony, gained weight when neighbors corroborated seeing him at home that night. Piece by piece, the case against him crumbled. But the trial wasn't just about evidence. It was a referendum on the system. The jury, more diverse this time, listened intently as Sarah painted a picture of Marcus's life, a kid who'd grown up dodging gang recruiters, who'd worked odd jobs to help Ruth pay bills, who'd found purpose mentoring others. She contrasted that with Harper's prejudice, playing recordings of her insults to show how bias had tainted the process. The prosecution, caught off guard by the public scrutiny, struggled to maintain their narrative. Marcus took the stand on the second day, his voice steady but raw. "I'm not a saint," he said, looking at the jurors. "I've made mistakes. But I didn't rob that store, and I don't deserve to be judged for my skin." The courtroom was silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone. Even the prosecutor, a seasoned attorney named Paul Grayson, seemed shaken, his usual confidence faltering. Deputy Carter testified too, recounting how he'd known Marcus for years. "He's the kind of guy who'd give you his last dollar," Carter said. "When I saw what Harper was doing, I couldn't stay quiet." His testimony was a turning point, humanizing Marcus in a way the prosecution couldn't counter. Carter's courage risking his own career to challenge a judge resonated deeply. On the final day, Judge Brooks delivered the verdict, "Not guilty." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Ruth sobbed, clutching Marcus's hand. Sarah hugged them both, tears in her eyes. Outside, supporters chanted Marcus's name, but he slipped out a side door, avoiding the cameras. He wasn't ready to face the world as a hero. The lawsuit moved forward, slower but steady. It led to new training programs for judges, mandatory bias reviews, and a push for more diversity on the bench. Marcus didn't attend every hearing. His life was back at the community center, where he expanded the mentorship program. Kids who'd seen his story on the news looked at him differently now, not with pity but with pride. He taught them to dream bigger than their circumstances, to fight for their worth. Carter, too, found his life changed. Promoted to sergeant, he became an advocate for reform within the sheriff's office, speaking at community forums about accountability. He and Marcus stayed in touch, their bond forged in that courtroom moment when justice flipped the script. Harper, meanwhile, faded from the headlines. Her trial ended in a plea deal, community service, and a permanent ban from judicial roles. Some called it a slap on the wrist, others saw it as a warning to others in power. For Marcus, it didn't matter. He'd won something bigger than her punishment: his freedom, his voice, his chance to redefine his story. Years later, Marcus stood at the community center, now renamed the Tate Center for Youth. A small wooden plaque from the courtroom, inscribed with "Justice Tested in Court," hung on the wall, a gift from Sarah, who'd become a close friend. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Marcus spoke to a crowd of kids, parents, and activists. "This isn't about me," he said, his voice strong. "It's about yous, about proving we're more than what they think we are." The applause was thunderous, but Marcus's eyes were on the kids, their faces full of hope. The story of Marcus Tate and Judge Harper didn't erase the divides in the system or the city. Prejudice lingered, as did distrust. But it sparked conversations, raw, messy, necessary ones. People argued in barber shops, on X, in classrooms. Was Harper a villain or a product of a flawed system? Was Marcus's victory a triumph or a fluke? Share your thoughts. Where does justice stand, and what do we owe each other to make it real?